Hey everyone! I hope you've been having a good week so far. This week, we're going to talk about how humans have evolved through time, both physically as well as behaviorally. So let's get right into it. Last week's video was a quick explanation on how humans evolved from primates, from the Australopithecus through to the modern-day Homo sapiens. Today, we will examine some of the changes that occurred in our bodies and in our brains in detail. Why did we have to evolve in the way we did? As Darwin's theory of evolution suggests, there were forces driving us to evolve the way we did, forces related to our ability to survive, to reproduce, and to provide fertile, viable offspring. Back in Africa, when humans did not exist yet, only primates, a major change in the environment is what propelled the evolution of primates. The climate in Africa became more arid, with savanna landscapes and fewer trees in general. This is what drove primates to start walking more on their 2 feet, what is called bipedalism. As they started coming down from the trees more often, their lower limbs started to develop more and more with time. This also drove them to change their diet from a predominantly omnivorous diet to a predominantly carnivorous diet. This was also made a lot easier when we started using fire to cook our meat. In order to eat more meat, we became hunters, so we started being able to run long distances. All these changes allowed us to survive. As we adapted to the climate, we adapted our diet and our ways of living. Additionally, we developed more efficient opposable thumbs that allowed us to grasp and handle objects, for example, tools that allowed us to hunt. Another noticeable change that occurred was our skin color. You may know by now that skin color differences are related to the weather of the location we live in. So when we evolved from primates, we developed dark skin colors which allowed us to deal with the climate of Africa and the amount of sun. Melanin, which is what gives us our skin color, helps protect from UV rays. So obviously, in warm and sunny Africa, our ancestors had dark skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. As we started moving into all areas of the globe, our skin started changing. The further north you go, the fairer the people will be, usually with fair hair as well as lighter eye colors. This is also true for the body type of individuals from different parts of the world. In warmer climates, individuals usually have longer limbs. This is because the surface area to volume ratio regarding our size is closely linked to our ability to maintain and regulate our internal body temperature. In colder weather, we need to maintain ourselves warmer, and in warm weather, we need to release heat to decrease our body temperature. A higher surface area will mean there is an increase in exchanges between our body and the surrounding environment. Therefore, this is good for warmer climates. On the other hand, smaller surface areas means there's less exchange of heat between our bodies and the surrounding environment, which is ideal for cold climates. As I mentioned before, when we became more carnivorous, we started hunting more, which meant running, a lot. This meant our bodies had to adapt to this type of physical exercise. Humans are the only primates capable of sustained endurance running, so running long distances for a large period of time. Some of our physical features which allow us to do this are our tendons in the lower half of our bodies, which act like springs. The shape of our feet is also important, as the arch of the foot works like a spring as well, allowing us to save up some energy when running long distances. The length of our legs, as mentioned before, is also an adaptation to allow us to run, as well as small feet and large glute muscles. Humans also developed sweat glands to allow us to lose heat by transpiration, and we started losing some body hair to increase heat loss as well. So now let's talk a bit about anatomy and how our brain and body have evolved to allow us to exercise. The brain is divided into different parts. Each part has its own function. One of those parts that we're going to talk about today is the Medulla Oblongata. This brain structure is part of the brainstem, which is on the lower part of the head. The main function of the medulla is to regulate respiration. It sends signals to the muscles which control respiration so that the breathing process can occur. This structure stimulates inspiration and expiration. But how does our brain know when we've inspired enough air and when we're overstretching our lungs? The answer to this is in special lung receptors which sense when the lungs have inflated enough. When they detect this, they send a signal to the medulla and to the pons, which is right above the medulla, and basically tells them to stop inspiration and to start expiration. When it comes to exercise, it becomes a bit more complicated. There are specific receptors in the brain which are sensitive to changes in the pH of a fluid which exists in the brain, called the cerebrospinal fluid. When we exercise, the CO2 in our bodies increases, which decreases the pH of our body and therefore the pH of the cerebrospinal fluid. When this change in the pH is detected by those receptors, then they send a signal to the medulla and the pons to tell them that the breathing process has to occur faster in order to remove that excess CO2 from our body. These receptors are called the carotid and the aortic bodies. Cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped through the circulatory system in 1 minute. Stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped by the left ventricle of the heart in 1 contraction. So in order to find out the cardiac output, you need to multiply the stroke volume by the heart rate. The number of beats your heart performs in a minute times the amount of blood pumped out by the left ventricle with each contraction, then you are able to find out the total amount of blood pumped out in that minute. As you can imagine, the cardiac output increases with exercise. As your heart rate increases, then the amount of blood pumped out of your heart is going to increase as well. So let us talk now more about how we get the energy we need to exercise. The energy we need is provided by the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats we mentioned in a previous video. When we ingest food, especially those carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that we talked about, we are supplying our body with energy. This energy is then converted into a chemical molecule called ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. This ATP molecule is like a battery, which carries energy to where it needs to be. As we mentioned before, carbohydrates are broken down to glucose, which is our main source of energy. Glucose can either be used right away, or it can be stored as glycogen and used later. Fats are our most concentrated source of energy, so if you have the same amount of fats and carbs, fats will provide you with more energy than carbs. One interesting way our body adapts to changes in our environment is the example of people who live at high altitudes, such as people who live on mountains. At such altitudes, the air has less oxygen than at lower altitudes. This means our bodies have to adapt to this so our cells don't die. In the short term, if you are used to living at low altitudes, when you go to higher altitudes, your breathing increases, and so does your heart rate, to increase the amount of oxygen going into your body. However, if you live in such conditions, your body adapts in other ways. You start producing more red blood cells and capillaries, and your lungs increase in size, to increase both the amount of oxygen and to facilitate gas exchange. Interesting, isn't it? And all of these changes in our bodies occurred during our evolution from primates until now, all to allow us to better adjust to our ever-changing environment. So this is the end of our video today. I hope to see you again next week. Bye bye!